Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here on Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z Martin, and tonight we're talking about fan fiction, why we read it, why we write it, why we love it, and what it does to feed our souls. But first, let's let our guests introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Carole.
Hi, Carole Stokes. I am an avid fanfic reader and a writer. I write under Firesign 10. You can find my stuff on AO3. I love being in fandom, and it's done wonderful things for me, which I'll be happy to discuss tonight.
Great. Melissa.
I'm Melissa Silvestre. I'm a reader of fanfic and a big fan of Carole's. Actually, I love her fanfic. I read it all the time. I get so excited when I get a notification that she's posted something. I'm relatively recently new to fanfic reading, so I'll give you a newcomer's perspective.
Mm-hmm. And Kristin.
Hi, my name is Kristin Jackson. I'm a graphic designer and freelance artist. I work mostly for people in the film industry right now. And I've been a fan of Supernatural since the very beginning, and have also worked with some of the people that work behind the scenes on the show. One of the things that I've really enjoyed along the way is that Supernatural is very prolific with fan fiction. And so that kind of helps me because I also write creatively. So that kind of, it gives, an outlet for me to explore other things that maybe I'd like to see in the characters.
Mm-hmm. And Justine.
Hi, I'm Justine Mastin, she, her. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, a yoga teacher of all things, and my specialty in everything that I do is incorporating pop culture. I have a book now in pre-sales called Starship Therapies, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life. So that gives a little bit of a sense into what I do with fan fiction, which is use it therapeutically. And I co-create fan fiction with my clients of their own lives, so real person fic of the life of client. And I am a reader of fanfic and a lover of it, obviously, enough that I brought it into the therapy room and I'm telling other people how to do it. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about fanfic. I'm excited.
And I'm thrilled to have all of you here. I'm Gail Z Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and more. As Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal, romance. And, I learned back in high school and college that I could entertain people with my writing. And I learned the basics of how to write by writing fan fiction. Now, that was before Supernatural. But that's what really gave me confidence in my writing. And so I don't have a chance to write fan fiction anymore, but I love reading it. And I'm a huge fan of Supernatural fanfic as well. So let's dive in. And, I confessed to falling in love with fan fiction when I was in high school and college. And of course, that was pre-AO3, pre-fanfic.net. The only way we could share fan fiction was in these small homemade fanzines that if you knew a guy who knew a guy, you could get on the list and they would send, you'd pay for the shipping and they'd send one to you. I ran a zine for like 3 years in college. Or you'd go to a convention, much smaller than they have today. Everybody'd go to a room party and you'd all sit in a line around the wall and you'd take a printout and read it and pass it down, read it and pass it down. And that's what you did all night, was you read this stuff that could have been handwritten, mimeographed, Xeroxed, Stone. You passed the physical copies down because you'd never see it again. We've come a long way since then. AO3 even won a Hugo. But how did you get into fan fiction and what was your gateway fandom? I'm going to start with Melissa because you said that you're pretty new to fanfic.
You actually got me into fanfic.
Oh, okay.
You mentioned it. You mentioned it somewhere on one of the your Supernatural group's posts, and I went, what is this thing that she's talking about? And I dove into the deep end hard. My fandom is Supernatural. I've been a Supernatural fan since the pilot, and I started reading the fanfic though relatively recently, somewhere along the line in the last season, because I was struggling with the fact that the show was ending. And so that was my way to cope. And I found some really great stories, found some really bad stories, but even the bad stories are entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How about you, Kristin?
I think I first started to look at the fanfics for Supernatural more seriously was during the hiatus. It was either between 5 and 6 or 6 and 7. And I just, I really wanted more content. And so I kind of set out to look around and thought, well, I'll just read other people's short stories. I love short stories personally. I love anthologies because you can get like lots of little takes on a theme or just, like a grab bag. So for me, I went in and I think it was the one Live Journal. Was that the one that came before fanfiction.net? So I started exploring those, and then I kind of moved over when everybody else moved over, and I never really got into the one you mentioned, the AO
Archive of Our Own.
Yeah. I never really got to that point because I had already started doing a lot of other stuff and I didn't have the time to explore. But yeah,
a lot of people are duplicated, many aren't, but AO3 can be easier graphically to read and find stuff. It's kind of got a better layout. How about you, Justine?
Yeah. And that was my come join us, Kristin.
Yes.
Come on over to AO3. Although I get how it could be a little overwhelming. You can order what you're looking for and it's not always quite what you want. I've been thinking about this a lot actually, where I discovered fanfic, and the first memory I have of fanfic is actually writing it, and I am not a fanfic writer, but I remember as a younger human after watching Stand By Me deciding that I needed more Will Wheaton and started writing my own Stand By Me fanfic. I have no idea if it was any good, but I enjoyed doing that. Excuse me, occupational hazard, I talk too much. And then as a grown human, I, very similar to Kristin, got into SPN fanfic during a hiatus because I was like, Cass needs to get in that bunker, right? And I am an unapologetic Destiel shipper. I do not hate I am not a ship hater. Sail your ship. This is just the one I'm on. And I happen to have a little bit of psychology to back it up, which makes it sound more impressive. But really, I'm just trying to back up my own argument. And then I started playing around on AO3 finding stuff, and I also like shorter things. I don't like the book long, just kind of get into the schmoop. That's where I want to be.
Schmoop is always good. How about you, Carol?
Well, I kind of came around this by two paths. One was that I had a couple of friends who were huge manga fans, and they got me into yaoi. So I was reading yaoi for a few years, and then somehow I got into Stargate Atlantis fanfic, and I have never watched the show. I mean, I watched like a couple, but I got into the fanfic big time. And I was reading that and going along my merry way. Start watching Supernatural. I get to about between seasons 3 and 4, and I think, oh my God. Of course, that was the longer hiatus because of the writer's strike. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And I was like, hey, if there's Stargate Atlantis fic, I bet there's Supernatural fic. Well, dove in, never came back. I read for about 3 years, and I started writing in 2012. And I'm writing to this day. I just finished posting a story last week.
Yeah, I told the story, and I was fortunate to have a chance to write a chapter for There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, which is the legacy book by Lynn Zubernis that collects stories from the cast, the fans, and I got a chance to write one. And I told my story in there that I hadn't read fan fiction for probably decades. I'd just been busy. And what little time I had, I was writing original stuff because I'm a full-time novelist, and that's what my husband and I do for a living. And then I discovered Supernatural halfway through season 11 and binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months so that I could be ready to live tweet by the beginning of season 12, as one does. And then we got to the end of, I got to the end of season 11. There was nothing, else until the new season. And I totally, needed a fix. So I thought, well, I know there's fan fiction out there. Let's go see if any of it's any good. Well, I went deep down the rabbit hole and read hundreds of supernatural stories, then popped my head up, and that's how I got into Slash and read hundreds of Slash stories. Came up for air, said, I wonder what the stuff that isn't fandom related looks like. Went out and started reading hundreds of the published non-fandom stories, said this is just too much fun, I'm missing out on something, and launched my Morgan Bryce pen name, and now I have 5 series of urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, all of which, like all of my urban fantasy or world, Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. So yeah, and I read a ton of the stuff. What do we love about it? What, we've mentioned it fills a gap when the show isn't on or when a show is over. There's a 250,000 supernatural stories on AO3 alone, and that's not counting what's everything else. What do we get out of this? Fame, fortune, glory, scratching an itch.
One could only wish.
Yes, yeah, and at this point, just jump in and answer, because I think we've all got strong feelings about all these things.
Well, I think that some, at least a lot of the stories I read were people who didn't like a way a plot line went or a season arc went. And I was thinking one of the things that just really impressed me around the time when I first started, discovering that there was this whole world of the supernatural fanfics out there, was that the group of fans that were, legitimate, either professional or amateur writers, came together and rewrote season 7 with Redemption Road. And that was just brilliant. They broke it up into little writers' rooms and they came up with a full season arc, and they said, we hated the way this season went. So, by God, we are going to just write our own version, which is better. And it really, in a lot of ways, was better. But I think it's, people that when they don't find something in the show that they really want to see, you can go out and either find someone that's already written about it, or you can just go in and write your own version. And I think that's it's a good outlet for people to have.
Yeah, there's a lot of fix-it fiction out there, which is where the show has left loose ends, dropped something, never come back to it, never fully addressed something. I was hoping they would deal with the voicemail. Never got to it. Yeah. And so there are a lot of fans taking it into their own hands to say, okay, I'm going to bridge the gap here. Here's how it really went.
I also find, both as a writer and a reader, there's just so many wonderful tangents you can take. At any point, you can follow a canon story and then say, instead of they turned right, what if they turned left? That kind of thing. I know I've used that before, kind of as a jumping off point where, what if this didn't work? What if that did work when it didn't in the show, and things like that? And where would that progression then take us? And I really enjoy reading those kinds of stories where there's often a lot of canon blended in. I wrote a story one time where it was Sam and Dean and John Cloud traveled all over the country, but there was no magic. He was a trucker, and so what was their life? Everything happened, that happened, but there was no magic. And so what's the reasoning behind it? Or vice versa, what if there was more magic? You know, I mean, there's a lot of things now with Sam being a witch, you know, so where does that go, and where does that take them? And so that kind of endless playground is really absorbing and enticing, both as a reader and then as a writer, because you're constantly like, what if? Or somebody says something and you're like, oh, what, you know. So it's such a big, beautiful playground.
Yeah. I
I didn't mean to choke you up there.
no, well, so something that you're talking about, Carole, is the concept of social constructionism, which is one of my very favorite topics. And friends at home, if you're not familiar, it's the idea that the world around us, our society, is socially constructed. We've been doing the same stuff for so long that things feel like facts rather than norms. But if you start asking, well, what if I didn't do that? What if I didn't accept that as an absolute truth?
Mm-hmm.
This is when we're starting to fanfic our life, right? And this is what I just so respect about fanfic writers, because you know, that's not my skill set outside of a therapy room. Actually, now I wrote a book. All right. Yeah. Okay. Give cred where cred is due. But I love this idea that, like, here is this world, and yeah, what are we going to do with this world? Here's what the showrunners or society or media has told us are facts. We're like, what if they weren't facts, though? What if that was just what we were told? And suddenly we get all this richness and representation. And as a queer human, finally seeing representation in fanfic that I'll never get on the screen. Right? I never did get that. I never did get that smooch.
Yeah. I think Supernatural also is particularly prolific and fertile because there's so much of it. We got 15 seasons to play with. So even if you stay in canon-based things, you got a lot of material. And if you don't, but you're talking about, we can explore all of the worlds where Sam and Dean are growing up under John as warriors, you know, and all of that. Or, you know, we got Sam and Stanford for this long. Well, you know, we can expand on that. We can expand on, we got all of these hunts. What about all the hunts in between? You know, I mean, there's nothing like a really great case fic, you know, where you're like, wow, this could have been in the show, you know, where you can pick any time slot. And, you know, now, of course, are we allowed to discuss season 15?
Sure.
Okay. So, and now you're getting fics about what happened before they go to heaven, what happened with them, and we're getting heaven fics. You know, and yet, just as you do with anything else, every single writer has their own take on it, you know, and so it's just, you know, we're not stuck with something that we only had 2 seasons of. Man, we have, like, you know, the universe.
Well, and, you know, even you talk about people who write still based in canon, even if you just wrote something that was the conversation after the credits rolled that, you know, they had in the car or in the motel or in the diner, you know, what happened right after the screen went to black, you'd still be writing 327 stories. So, you know, there's a lot of room here for creativity. And some people have done just that and gone back and reinterpreted. You know, Paper Storm has done deleted scenes for every episode in 8 seasons.
Yeah, it's a big trope.
Yeah. So there's no limit to where you can take the stories, even though we've been fortunate to have so much canon to go from. How about you, Melissa? What do you find when you're reading?
I tend to love canon as much as I love alternate universe. I'm fascinated by the writers who can take Sam and Dean and everybody else that they choose to take with them and put them in an alternate universe and still have the characters sound right. Because that's the important thing to me. I need Sam and Dean and Cass and whoever else they bring to still be Sam and Dean and Cass and everybody else. And some writers have done an amazing job with creating these really rich alternate universes, but they're still our boys. And it's still really interesting. So that's one of the things that I love seeing in fanfic.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, some of the fan fiction writers capture Sam and Dean better than a few of the series writers.
Yes.
The ones whose episodes always left us all going, what the hell, guys? Have you ever watched the show? We won't mention
Dean
any
with the
names,
gun.
but we all know who they are.
Dean with the gun on Sam at the end.
Yeah, Dean's reaction to Jack about not being family. So many times it's like, have you watched the show? Do you know what this is about? Have you seen a few episodes? Yeah. Well, and this one's kind of for Justine, but I've also seen a whole subcategory of, and everybody else chime in too. I've seen a whole subcategory of fan fiction where you can definitely see that the writer is probably working through something that they're dealing with themselves. Often chronic illnesses. Dean is a brittle diabetic. Sam is dealing with chronic debilitating disease. You know, there's a real world issue here that they are, or, you know, there's childhood abuse or something like that. And you can kind of see that this is also somebody's do-it-yourself, perhaps therapy project. There's a lot of validity in that. Where does that come at? How does that strike you, Justine?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. This world has given us so many characters that people resonate with that can become an avatar for them. So if they aren't ready to write their own fanfic, you know, my own experience when I was a child, but they see themselves in Dean Winchester and they can say, you know what? I see myself in Dean. I'm going to put Dean in this situation. I'm going to see how Dean would deal with it. So that when I am feeling more ready, I'm going to pull Dean out of the story and pull him into the real world and let him help me when I'm ready. And it's so powerful. I love that people are doing that, and how intuitive, right? Nobody's teaching this. I mean, we've been talking about fanfic for a long time, but as far as the therapeutic aspects of fanfic, I mean, that's pretty new. So these folks just realized, wow, I feel better, and found their own outlet, which is amazing. It shows such resilience. I love it.
Well,
I think that helps with the you know, the tags too, like what is it, the hurt comfort. So people that are hurting in their own lives, they like to go and read things that make them feel like there's people out there that care and feel that same way. And here's a story about, you know, characters having an emotional comforting reaction to each other, or a parenting reaction. So you can kind of use those tags to go look for stories like that really help you deal with something that you might be going through, and the writer's going through, and everybody's kind of going through it together. And it's nice to know that there's a community out there of a lot of people that feel and are experiencing and going through the similar things that you are.
Well, and
Absolutely.
you know, when writers get together and talk, we often admit that we were drawn to write a story, or we were realizing that we were writing something that we were dealing with sometimes years afterwards. And there are many times we'll go back to one of our, you know, early books and go, wow, I didn't realize I was dealing with that, but I guess I was, because here it is on the page, and I didn't mean to put that in, but there's a lot of subconscious that goes into writing, and a lot of coping. You know, if you read about Anne Rice writing the first Interview with the Vampire book, she wrote it while she was grieving losing her daughter, and she wrote the whole book in like a white heat over just a couple of days because she was dealing. And there's a passionate undercurrent in that book that you can believe that. So this is something that fan fiction writers and book writers and writers everywhere, I think, share, is we work these things out on paper.
Oh, that's so interesting, Gail. Just this tiny little thought that came up because as you were talking about Anne Rice, I was like, oh, I wish Anne was more open to fanfic writers. But I hadn't heard that story before. And if this story is her healing fanfic, of course she doesn't want people fanficking it. Like that's my journey. I don't want you fanficking my journey. And that actually gives me a lot more compassion for Anne Rice. So thank you.
Well, and there is, for those of us who make a living off the books, there is a legal component where if somebody, most of us now say, just don't tell me about it. I can't see it. I can't know it. I can't read about it. Don't send me the links. I don't want to know it's there, because for legal reasons, we don't want somebody to be able to come back and go, oh, you took my idea. Some of the more senior writers are a little more proprietary about some of their things. Those of us who are more enmeshed with the internet go, you're going to do it whether I say so or not. Just don't tell me. God bless you. Enjoy yourself. So that's the other undercurrent there. But yes, I think that could be very much when somebody feels like they poured out their life story and their blood on paper, you don't really want other people running with it.
I, of course, have never had anybody do that because I'm writing in the fanfic. But absolutely, I have friends who have written to work through their, physical issues, psychological issues. I've done it. I wrote a story about, it was actually RPF, but nonetheless, where one of the characters could not understand why he was never happy when he had every reason to be happy. And it's not going then into the real life story of what happened to a person who wasn't happy, but into finding out he had an actual, chemical issue in his brain. And, nothing was going to fix it except, going to a doctor and getting it fixed and stuff. And that was one of the two most personal things I've ever written. And in response, I got the most personal comments in reply, including a person who replied to my story and said, you have exactly described what has happened to me for the past 2 years. And I'm going to go to my doctor immediately and have them look into this because I never understood why this happened. And that's just, mind-boggling and everything. And I was like, man, if I write 300 stories or 500 stories in my lifetime, and one person actually was able to relate to the point that it helped them, that's incredible, but there's so many things you can work through and so many issues in so many different ways. And the best part is that you're working through it in a safe way for you. You're not having to confront necessarily those triggers or whatever the bleakness of it is face on, like, there it is. You get to work it through in this safe world at a distance and process it. And that, tying into your stuff, Justine, is just, it's fantastic for the writers and for the readers, because the readers, like I say, then read it and go, wow, somebody else went through this, Sorry, I tend to burble.
No, I think that's really true. And I would say in the 5 or so years since I've been really back reading fan fiction, supernatural fan fiction, pretty much exclusively, one of the themes that I see popping up so much more now than I saw it 5 years ago is one of the characters is trans. One of the characters is dealing with body dysphoria. And I think that's a fascinating exploration in the fandom where people are, again, coming to terms with and understanding something through characters that they love and trust.
Mm-hmm. And in a world that isn't going to hurt them over it,
mm-hmm.
In a bubble.
Mm-hmm. Kristin, you've been quiet. What are you thinking?
Well, I was thinking it's sort of related tangent of working through things. And I hope I don't get emotional over this, because it was kind of, especially at the time, it was extremely emotional for me. But back in college, I had a lit professor. And up to that point, I was like creative on all fronts, writing, graphic design, I was into the fine art, sculpture, all of it. And so I'd taken one of the short stories that I had written, which was it was like a little horror thriller fic. And I gave it to the lit professor because now I am older and I wanted to have like older person input, professional input that wasn't the high school teacher saying, this is a really great story. I wanted somebody who I felt would be able to give me constructive criticism to say how I could make it better or things I could do to it. And he gives it back to me. And this is handwritten. So it's like sheets of notebook paper with my handwriting on it. And he had red inked the entire thing, just red inked with red ink comments. And I was so devastated. I mean, I couldn't even speak. I just took the paper afterwards and tail between my legs and so humiliated and just walked out. And I put down that pen and I did not pick it up. He crushed all my creative writing out of me. And so it was 2011. And there was, I spent, all those years, like almost 20 years, thinking that my writing side of me was dead. It had died. I put a tombstone on it and I just left it behind because that was kind of how I felt. Like all the words were stolen from me. And suddenly it was like out of the blue, a complete ending of a short story came to my head. It just like, and the beginning. I didn't have a middle, but I was so surprised because I thought that part of me was atrophied, no more words. And so I didn't know, what to do with that. So I just kind of filed it away like I do with art. Is if I'm staring at a blank sheet of paper and I'm not sure where to go with it, I just kind of file it to the back of my head and let my subconscious kind of percolate. And eventually about 2 weeks later, it spit out the middle part of the story. And so I had a complete story. And I'm thinking that if I had not been a fan of Supernatural, that Supernatural fanfic, I never would have had that experience. And I'd still probably never have rediscovered that lost part of myself to this day.
Well,
so I wrote it down and I posted it on that fanfic.net, and it was called Small Things. And it has like a surprise ending, so I can't tell anybody. It's a twist at the end, which is exactly how I used to write stories. I always had like a little twist at the end. And then I thought, okay, that's it. All my words, I don't feel any more words in me. So maybe I just had like built up words and they all poured out and now it's over. And maybe about 6 months later or so, suddenly another, just boom, right in my head, full story. Like my subconscious had gone through it, edited, worked the whole thing out. And so I came up with a second story. And that was kind of exploring, like for me, I was always interested to know what Castiel was doing either before he met the boys or in the in-between times when he would kind of disappear at random and you were always wondering, what was he doing during that period of time? So I wrote that story. And then another time I was just writing a story or I was talking with a friend, and it was a crossover between Star Trek and Supernatural. And it took me the time from concept to me writing it down while I was talking to her to uploading it to fanfic.net in 12 minutes. It was just it was very short, but it was a crossover story. So I have, through Supernatural, and because of this series, and because of the fandom, and because of fan fiction, I've been able to reconnect with a lost part of myself, which is very meaningful for me. So anyway, that's my story.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful.
There's nothing like reclaiming part of yourself for whatever reason.
Yep.
You know, and that's a big one.
Mm-hmm. That's huge. Melissa, I don't want to skip you. You've been quiet.
Fanfic, I found some ways to handle some of the things that happened growing up. And it's been, I actually read something today that I was like, wow, in this version of John Winchester, he's just like my mother. And it was interesting to see how Dean handled it. And there were just a couple of aha moments that when I finished the story this afternoon, I kind of put it aside and said, well, I wasn't expecting to come across that today. And it was surprising. And those moments always surprise me when I stumble across them in fanfic. And it's kind of neat to think about the fact that I had the experiences that I had, and other people have had similar experiences. You're not alone in that room. And those moments are always really kind of gold.
Yeah. I mean, I tell the story in the chapter, and there'll be peace when you are done, and it's too long for this venue, but I basically explain how fandom saved my life. And originally it was Star Trek, the original series, but I realized one of the things that connected me so much to Supernatural was that Sam and Dean, in all of their monster slaying, ended up slaying one of my personal monsters. And that I didn't realize it until later, but it was like, well, yeah, they're my heroes on more than one level. And that's a huge connection when you see that in a story. And then when you have the ability to read or create more stories in that world that kind of lend itself to that. And there's a lot of that going on, in addition to just how much fun it is to play with the character.
Right. I've definitely written tons of stuff just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And you know, they're not called PWPs for nothing.
Right.
But I've written longer, in-depth, layered, character-driven stories and everything as well. And before I was actually writing, I was in the fandom, and I was reading the tie-in books, watching the show, and I spent 3 years as an undiagnosed bipolar depressive, which means I don't have manic, only depression. Unremitting depression for 3 years gets really old. And my saving grace was every night I would get into bed and I would read I would read in a tie-in book, I would watch the show, and it's exactly as you said, Gail. They were killing those monsters. And it gave me, I'm just like, if they're killing the monsters, then I can kill the monsters too. You know, I can keep going because they keep going. They keep getting hammered, I'm getting hammered, but they're going so I can go. This is all a long time ago. I'm happy and adjusted and, you know, controlled and structured and all that kind of stuff. And I talk about it because I've always been very, very transparent about this because of stigma and, you know, someone's got to talk about it. And I only do it here because once again, here we are in that bubble, in that structure. My monsters in my brain got to be those monsters, and you know, there's that whole reflection of we'll do it there, I'll do it here, and we'll move on. Mm-hmm. You know, and it was of course a real joy to move out of that section of life. But then move into the writing and the playing and the fun, as well as writing. You know, I've written dark stuff, I've written deep stuff. Gail's read some of my stuff. You know, I go all over the map. But to use some of that emotional depth to deal with your own deep emotions is infinitely helpful. And I'm sure that's must be what you find as you're working with your clients. And, you know, and anybody who reads is going to tell you it's that kind of outlet. It's not just escapism, although it's great escapism. It's great fun, but everybody gets stuff pent up inside them. And this is just a great, I'm going to read and I'm going to watch them work it out. I'm going to write and I'm going to work it out myself, and then maybe somebody else work theirs out, and so on. So
Oh, I so appreciate all of your honesty and vulnerability. It's really hitting me in the feels. And it also makes me angry at my profession because I'm still, trying to convince folks who do the work that I do that pop culture saves lives. That stories matter, that that if a client comes in and says they're a Supernatural fan, they're not just making small talk with you. They are trying to explain to you what helps them make meaning in their life.
And what their world construct is. It gives you that immediate frame of reference. Somebody says, I'm a Supernatural fan. I already know 15 things about them.
Right. Shortcut to understanding. It's right there. We've got a shared language, even if I don't know anything else about them. And so I so appreciate all of you continuing to talk about this, and I'll keep hammering on my side, trying to get the rest of the therapist community on to see what is really happening and what really matters to people.
Yeah, that might even be a way, because you always hear about therapists saying that you should journal or write your feelings down or whatever. And that is so hard for a lot of people because you're writing first person and maybe you don't want to deal with something. But if they could write it as a character in the show they already are familiar with, that might be an easier bridge for a lot of people to cross with their writings.
Yeah, absolutely.
An easier way to explore their own thoughts and feelings without having to look in the mirror over it.
Yeah, you get to look at Jensen's handsome face. Or Jared. I'm not hating, just Jensen's my man.
Well, I think also when you slip into the skin of the hero of the story, then even if they are fighting your battle, they are fighting it with their tools and abilities. So you're braver because you're not you now, you're in the skin of the hero. And when they conquer the dragon or whatever it is they're slaying, you're conquering it vicariously. And, that's really not that different from any other fiction that you get really immersed in. You get immersed in it because something calls to you and you're identifying with something. And it's true even when you're writing completely original fiction that isn't based in a fandom. There's something about that character that calls to you, that's a part of you. And so really it's just it goes with reading and it goes with creating. And one of the things I love about the fan fiction world is also they're so proactive on all the trigger warnings and the tags. In fact, I've seen pro authors who write blurbs for their books on Amazon, and I'll circle back around to them and go, you started out in fan fiction, didn't you? I can tell from your tags. you wrote fan fiction, right? And just to let you know, I really think that the male romance genre, especially the paranormal, exists because of Supernatural. So many of us are fans. I think my favorite tag is dead dove do not eat. I mean, if you want a tag that says just what it is, don't.
I had to look that up. The first time I saw that, I was like, what? And I had to go look it up. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, there you go.
And I think it's based in some other fandom. Is it based in X-File? It's somebody who left it's somebody from another TV show. The character left a dead dove in a bag in the office refrigerator and wrote on it, dead dove do not eat. And then somebody goes and opens it thinking it's their sandwich and finds a dead dove. Don't eat it. But that's basically the tag that says, I warned you, if you go forward, you know what you're getting.
Absolutely.
But only fandom would come up with something like that.
I love it. And I love when people make up their own tags sometimes too, because it's like, oh wow, I should have thought of that for my story.
Well, some people though, they go overboard. You know, the
Oh,
overboard taggers, where the whole first page of their short story is nothing but tags. And
and
I'm
then
like,
when you
oh,
go to
come
read it, it's like
on.
1,200 words. I'm like,
Yes.
really? Give me
More
that if
tags
you
than
got
story.
80,000 words. 1,200 words, this is longer than the story.
So now that the show is over, at least for now, although Jared and Jensen have both said they really want to come back to it, and I think we've all got our fingers crossed. What's the role of fan fiction now? Where does it take us? Where do you see fan fiction going while we wait and see what happens and whether we get a reboot? Anybody?
I personally love to see another version of like a Redemption Road for season 16. Somebody to come up and they just start writing their own season.
Yeah. And that's been done several times. I don't know the names of all of them, but I know that there have been some pretty detailed production of things that have undertaken to write a whole season with a season arc and everything else. Anybody else have guesses on where the road takes us? Or
I think there's still a lot of fertile ground left to be plowed. You know, like
Yeah.
I said, the supernatural universe is so infinite. You know, I mean, even if you say, oh, this person and this person took the same prompt and wrote a story about that, they're still going to be like this. You know, they're still going to go different ways and everything. So I haven't seen anything yet to intimate. I'm not saying they won't branch into other fandoms. I mean, certainly the Walker fandom is, you know, blossoming and everything, but I still see so much dedication to the supernatural fandom. And I personally have many stories left that I would like to tell. And I still am enjoying totally reading all the stories I'm finding that are new to me. They may have been written in, you know, 2005, and I'll be like, oh, look at this. I never read this. I mean, so I think it's still certainly going to chug along for quite a while. I mean, it's still playing on Netflix all the time, and it's alive, you know. And both of them going into Jared, going into Walker, Jensen going into The Boys, they're both still active. So even as they're in their new journeys, the old journeys are still connected. So I think it'll still be around for a good long time.
I just want all the fic of heaven husbands. That's just. I wanted to see it. I didn't get to see it. So just keep writing it.
Well, and you know, if you think about it, over 15 years of Sam and Dean's lives, we only got to see 20 hours. And yeah, those 20 hours might have been several days, but still not 365. There's a lot of what were they doing the rest of the time? Even if they were goofing off, even if they did go to Vegas or the Grand Canyon. I love those fics too.
Yeah,
They
some of
take-
those are just great stories, you know, where it's like, oh, they did this, they did that, they, you know, just kind of bopped around and, hey, let's go to the beach. Wow. You know.
Day in the life stories that they didn't get to tell a lot of because it was an action adventure series. But we kind of want to see what did they do when they were laid up for 2 months because somebody had a broken leg? How many hands of poker can you play? You know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what if there.
And there's so much richness in the world around them because, of course, we're focusing on Sam and Dean, but they have a host of, you know, other people that they're always interacting with that, you know, help bring out their own, you know, stories in connection with. And, you know, so Sam and Dean are here with this person or that person, or somebody calls them for help. And there's just so much.
There's that moment when you realize that Missouri Mosley and Pastor Jim and Caleb have had much richer storylines in fan fiction, and they appeared for like one episode.
Yes, you're not wrong. Oh my, or things that we never got to see because the story went elsewhere and we didn't have time. Long time ago, Oh, it was right before, it was during, I can't think of the name of it now, but right before they go to face Lucifer, and Ellen and Joe and Bobby and Cass, or they're all at, hanging out together. It's the night before the end of the world kind of thing. And we see Dean hit up Joe, right? And she's like, "Are you pulling the last night on Earth on me?" and cuts him off. And I was like, well, what about Bobby and Ellen? Maybe they had a last night together, and there's all kinds of interesting things like that you can just pull out here and there and say, what about this? What about that? It's, our focus is Sam and Dean, and I think will always be Sam and Dean, but there's a whole world around them that is also, rich for mining.
Well, I think that's wonderful news for everybody, that the world goes on, and hopefully Jensen and Jared will come back and join us and do some more official stuff. But until then, we've got them covered. The legacy lives on. We've blown through the time. Is anybody really surprised? So before we wrap up, let's go around, let people know where they can find you online, and let's start with Carole.
You can find my fic under Firesign 10 on AO3 and on LiveJournal, and I'm on Twitter as @true_Firesign 10.
Cool. Kristin?
You can find my fanfic on fanfiction.net as @Anycat, ANICAT 68. And you can find me on Twitter @Anycat without the 68.
Melissa?
Can't find me anywhere online except stalking one of your Facebook groups.
You're pretty easy to find in my groups, which is wonderful. How about you, Justine?
You just one for the road. You can find me at blueboxcounseling.com, starshiptherapies.com with an S, just like the Enterprise. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom, because I take a holistic approach to healing mind, body, and fandom. And please pre-order the book, available at all your favorite booksellers.
I already got it. And you can find me online at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com, on social media, pretty much variations of those names. Just remember the Z and spell Bryce right. And you're welcome in our Supernatural TFWNC group, where we discuss this kind of thing all the time. So thank you all so much for being with me tonight. And thank all of you for watching and listening. There'll be a lot more Supernatural coming up here in Continual. So we'll see you online.